Hey, everybody, it's Carol Milletta from the Parenting 411 with another episode of News You Can Use. I hope you all will come in and celebrate with us on our last Thursday News You Can Use, where we are celebrating dads. We've been doing that all month, talking about a wide range of topics like developing leadership skills, helping children develop a sense of purpose. And I'm really looking forward to tonight's show. I have joining me Richard Bynum. He's a senior executive. He's going to talk about how he manages to make time to show up and be present for his children, even as he manages his own busy career. And we all know that more and more, it's hard to distinguish between family time and work time. Especially in the age of technology. Our employers expect us to be available at any moment, almost responding to emails, responding to messages. And, we forget sometimes when we're at home that we really ought to set some boundaries for family time. So he's going to talk about that tonight. I'm sure a lot of you are dealing with some of those issues as well. Before I bring him on, I just also want to remind you of tomorrow, the You Are Enough conference kicks off. Trust me, you do not want to miss it. I hope you have registered. Registration is free. However, if you want to have access later to the replay, because there are going to be some really heavy hitting speakers on this stage. You've got, of course, Dr. Cheryl Wood, Les Brown, George Frazier, Gloria Mayfield Banks, and the list goes on. And I'm thrilled to be there. Not that I think that I'm a big shot like they are, but I definitely feel privileged to be on the stage. I go on tomorrow evening at 8 p.m. So I hope you'll tune in. And like I say, it might even be worth it to register and also pay a small fee just to have the replay so that you can listen to those inspirational speeches again and again. So that's for tomorrow, and you can register at youareenoughconference.com. So I hope to see you in the place, hope to see you in the comments, encouraging all of us speakers. And with that, I'm just going to head into tonight's edition of News You Can Use. I'm going to bring Mr. Richard Bynum on, and by all means, if you have any questions or comments, drop them in the chat. We want to hear from you. And with that, I will no longer delay. Hey, Richard, how are you?
Hi, Carol. How are you? I'm great.
Good. So why don't we just start off by, telling our viewers a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So Richard Bynum. As Carol mentioned, I am a senior executive. I guess I could say that these days. I've got a family who I adore, a wife and two kids, both teenagers, and actually starting to get, a little older in the teenage continuum, and a dog. So we're a full service, sort of nuclear family over here.
Oh, okay. So you are, a busy senior executive that often involves a lot long hours. It can involve long hours at the office. It can also involve a lot of travel. Mm-hmm. So how do you manage to be present for them and to stay connected with them?
Yeah, this is a really great topic, and I'm glad we're talking about it tonight. Carol, I'll tell you, I am, by the way, nowhere near perfect, as none of us are. And I think anything that I have to say about this topic is I come by it honestly, meaning that I've made a lot of mistakes. So earlier in my career, I did travel a fairly significant amount on a weekly basis there for a while. And my kids at the time were much smaller. My wife worked out of the home, which we sort of thought, maybe I sort of thought, was going to be the perfect solution, right? So I would go to work, she would work out of the home, the kids would come home, life would be kind of, that Cosby Show kind of imagery that I think a lot of us have in our heads from our childhood. But quickly, I got a sense that it wasn't quite going to be enough. And I'll actually even remember, as many folks do in their careers, there's a lot of people that you connect with who are maybe more senior than you. Maybe you're working for them or you're working adjacent to them and you're learning as you go, and you get to know these folks. And one of the things that I remember taking a lot of note of was that there were some really successful people that I was encountering, but you would catch little snippets that suggested that they really weren't that successful at home.
Mm.
Home was kind of a second thought, and the outcomes of that, with respect to kids and married life and those things, you felt, you heard some things that weren't great. And so when I began to travel, I just, sort of thought we had all our bases covered. And as I said a moment ago, realized quickly that we didn't. And that required some reshuffling. It required some reprioritization. It required some heart-to-heart conversations with my spouse. And, fortunately, my career took me into a place where I had to travel a lot less, about 3 or 4 years into that time. And when my travel schedule got more normalized to, almost more of a regional versus a national schedule, one of the promises I sort of made to myself was, and frankly had to, we were dealing with some things with the kids and with my wife that I just felt needed my direct attention and my want and need to be present, which is, something I know we're going to talk about tonight, which is to say, not just there, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of us these days are just there.
Mm-hmm.
Come home, something's going on, we grab some dinner, an hour or two later, you're thinking about heading to bed, you go to bed, you get up in the morning and you do it all over again. Being present to me is a lot more than that. And it doesn't mean that you have to, sort of have an intensity of focus. Lord knows my teenagers do not want me to intensely focus on them. But it does mean grabbing those moments,
Right.
and trying to make moments, if you can, that you're going to remember for a long time. A good friend of mine gave me some advice about this, and I started doing it probably about 5 years ago, and I continue to do it now. And he said every day he has a group text, and he sends the family a message. And it could be a meme or it could be just something on your mind. And he said, now look, they're never going to respond, particularly your kids. They're not going to respond. They're not going to acknowledge it. The more you talk about it, the less they're going to want to talk about it. But they will look at it and they'll pay attention. And he said, if you get to a place where one day you don't do it, they'll look up and say, hey, Dad, I didn't get your message today. And that's, and then you'll kind of know. And so I've done it now for, I think it's been 3 or 4, it's definitely been 4 years. And every day I have a little reminder on my phone and I send everybody the same message. Sometimes I send different ones depending on what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And it just allows me to connect to them, I think, in a personal way about what's on my mind in their context that day.
Mm-hmm.
And we just, it's those little things. I mean, we're all busy. And if we could take a minute or two to do something small or large, I just feel like it's going to make a big difference, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, when they become the people that I hope that they become. And I'm an old guy and I'm just looking at them and hopefully, really proud of who they've become.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I wonder, when you think back to when you were maybe in college or, just out of college, and you thought about a family and what that would look like, how does it differ from, how you thought it would be in terms of your career and your...
Completely and totally. Again, I grew up in that sort of Cosby Show era, right? And it's funny because, and I've talked to this about with my spouse. I in my head kind of replaced some of my family memories with the Cosby Show. Like my dad my mom were sort of in the house. They divorced later, but those early days feel very Cosby-esque. I don't know if that's appropriate to say that these days get Cosby, but what have you? You know what I mean, right? So kind of the house, and then there were kids. I had a sister. We had a dog. People were running around doing their own thing. Friends came and went. Mom and dad always seemed to have all the answers. And one of the things, and I talked to my mother about this really probably about 10 years ago when my kids were small. I sort of said, how did you have all the answers? And she said, I didn't have all the answers. We didn't know. We didn't know in many cases, from one moment to the next, exactly what was going to be right. And she talked to me about the notion that maybe it's not about right, and maybe it's not about your expectations. And so if I think about the difference between what I expected and what my reality is, our reality is, it probably is the distance between that fantasy and set of expectations and what's truly here. I've got two great kids. I've got a great wife. They're not perfect human beings. They don't always do what I want them to do. I don't always do what they want me to do. And sometimes we're just off kilter a little bit, right? I think particularly during the pandemic here, and we're sort of at the beginning and the end of that, hopefully. But for a good year, we were all here, right? We were all here all the time. When we kicked it off, we did the family game night, and we did the movie night, and we watched all the Avengers movies, and then we watched all the series on Netflix, and we did all the things. And then it was June of last year, right? So we still had a while to go, right? And you're like, okay, now what do we do? And we had conversations, and thankfully school started, right? And school was, if you go back a short time ago, it's amazing, what teachers and the schools did to get themselves ready for this school year, but it was always going to be a bit of a train wreck. And so, our kids started back with school. My daughter actually changed school, so she was going to a new school. It was sort of virtual at first, and then it was virtual into hybrid, and then it was kind of hybrid at the holidays. It was back to virtual. And at the end of the year, finally, they both went back, sort of full time. But thank God, because more people got to interact with more people and engage with more people. We got a little bit of a break, if you will. And, I think we're still suffer at the moment from a little bit of, they say distance makes the heart grow fonder. We need a little distance. So the kids are about to head off to a nice camp for a few weeks. We're about to head off and get a little time away too. And that'll do wonders. I would expect that, when they come back and we come back together as a family, things still won't be perfect, but a little time apart, particularly at this age, I think will be a great thing. All that said, making sure that on a daily basis, you touch them in a way, it may not be physical, but you touch them in a way that they know you're there. I think you've got teenagers, actually your kids, they're not teenagers anymore, right? So you've been through where I am. They don't really want you to be, there, but they want to make sure you're there. And I feel a lot of that, and I know my wife feels a lot of that, and so that's kind of where we are at the moment, and we just make our way through every day.
Yeah, I mean, it's good to hear from a parent that had children in school, although yours aren't young, little children in school during this time, because I was home alone essentially because of, as you mentioned, my sons are older, they're in college, and they opted to stay where they were, and we were comfortable with their living situation. And then, my husband was in the area. where they were too. And so then we just decided as a family, they'd stay there.
Yeah.
And so that they could be focused, even, since school was virtual, they could have done it at home, but we really wanted them to stay in school mode. So that they opted to stay together, the three of them. So I felt good with that at least the three of them were together.
Yeah.
But I was home alone. So, I didn't, and I certainly had some adventures. I didn't have a pandemic to contend with when my children were younger. But, we had some things happen, the what was it? Blizzards and other kinds of things that would upend the family maybe for a week.
Yeah, right, exactly. Exactly.
So it's been fascinating to me, to hear how families with children of various ages adjusted during that time. And so let's see, let me just see here. We've got somebody here. Thank you, George. I'm glad you tuned in with us. He said he loves it. This is great insight. And he said his children are way younger, and he's right. He has 3 children, but he's taking notes, he said.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah. Now that is the one grace we had, was that our kids were not younger. I've talked to a number of colleagues and friends who have younger kids. By younger, I mean sort of elementary school. And as confusing as this time was for my teens, right? Who, despite their best intentions, they have a little structure. If you're a 6-year-old, like this was hard. I've got a good friend of mine. His son's a little older. His son's 7, but really struggled with this because well, one, it's just not natural, right? For a kid that age, school is, despite the best tech, we've got great technology here, right? You and I are talking, on our own power. We didn't need like a whole, infrastructure to do this. We're just getting on the call here. And, so the technology is terrific. But for that young kid, going to school is going to a building, being there with his 13 or 15, sort of best friends who all are kind of like him, bebopping around. There's a teacher kind of in the front beginning to provide a little bit of that infrastructure that's going to serve them well later in life. Like, when is the time to use your inside voice? When is the time to sit still? When is the time to pay attention? When is the time to play? Those social things. And moms and dads, I don't think are super equipped to do everything we've been called to do. I've said a bunch of times to people, they're going to be studying this generation of kids for the next 30 years. And I just only hope we haven't done any irreparable harm. But all the more reason why, I think being present and being a figure in their lives that's stable is even more important. Because if you didn't have that stability, if mom or dad or both mom and dad, whatever the situation is, or both dads or both moms, aren't there to provide that stability, I don't know what a kid does. I think we see the outcomes of that sometimes in a lot of folks, and none of it like sort of works out. It's a hard thing to do without that stability.
And I'm wondering I talked about this at the beginning of the pandemic. Like, I spoke at a women's entrepreneurs conference the day before we shut down. And so I it turns out I was talking about how to stay connected with your kids. And so a mom, raised her hand and said, I think that, they may shut down school, and what am I going to do? My husband and I are both entrepreneurs. We work at home. And, I start off with, I'm not really sure that's going to happen.
It'll be fine.
Right. But if it does, then I just kind of, spoke off the cuff. And for about 6 or 8 months of the pandemic, people asked me to talk about that. Because what I really talked about was, getting a routine down, providing some stability. But I was also like, take advantage of those moments, like, and to connect as a family, to recharge, and because a lot of the schools, I have to give a lot of them credit for being able to pull something together pretty quickly. And that, what I saw that was really nice was a lot of them built in breaks, like, in between classes that the kids normally wouldn't have quite have had if they were going to school. Yeah. So it was like, go take a walk between the classes or whatever. And so, I talked a lot about that. I talked about using that time to teach your children things that, you don't have time for ordinarily, because you're going from this activity to the next. And, we parents, of course, we know we can do things so much quicker. So, we're not going to teach them how to wash clothes because they're going to mess them up and whatever. So let me just do it. And right. Before you know it, you're sending them to college and they're like, yo, so how do I do this?
Yeah. So this, I can hear my wife call, because this is my wife and I are, when we have our disagreements, it's usually about these issues. Because I'm the one that says, well, let's just get it done. Why are we, the men, let's just fix it. And my wife's like, no, not sending them to college, not knowing how to wash their clothes or whatever. And I look, I agree in principle. It's kind of one of those academic things. Like, I agree with the math in principle, and yet there's no way that fits into this whole. So particularly again, in this environment, like, it feels to me like we spend an awful lot of time and energy, burning an awful lot of energy, like trying to force some of that stuff to happen. And I know I'm wrong, by the way. I know I'm breaking every parenting rule there, but I will just say, sometimes I just, I wish we could just be at peace, get all this stuff done to be at peace.
Well, do me a favor. Yeah. And this summer, if they don't learn anything else, teach them that. So, okay. But seriously, that's what I was saying though. Take that time, since you all are home, involve them in cooking and things like that. And just teach them things. And so, and then it goes without saying to connect more with them, because, like you said, a lot of times we're in the vicinity, but we're not really present. Yeah. And so I talked about all of that. But the funny thing was that in the beginning of this, all parents were obsessed with was, now I'm homeschooling, now I'm this, now I'm that. And I'm like, there is a silver lining. And I said that to the lady. I said, there might be a silver lining here, because although my children were gone, I was remembering how harried I was and how we went from one activity to the next. And, I saw a break. I saw an opportunity for a break myself when this first started, even, for people with kids. And one thing I said though, was, whatever you do, don't go back to normal. Yeah. And don't go back to business as usual. I mean, there's obviously there are going to be some things you're going to go back to work. They're going to go back to school. But, you have to decide be intentional within your family that there's just some things you're going to hold on to. So I'm curious about what new practices or traditions you all may have started that you all have resolved that you're going to continue to do, and be intentional about it and protect those things going forward.
Yeah, I would love to say that we have taken as rigorous a path as you just described about it. We haven't, but I'll tell you the one thing that I think we have learned. I hope that we keep, and I have every intention on keeping, and that is a recognition that everything isn't going to be the way that you think it's going to be. Right. So here's what I mean. Right. So, I can remember, a million years ago, back in 2019, when, we would, sort of plan a Saturday. We would run from, sort of, sun up to sunset, doing a bunch of things that seemed important at the time, always pretty much kid-centered. and the kids needed to be a certain place doing a certain thing at a certain time, as a routine matter. And I would either pick up the ball or my wife would pick up the ball or what have you. And one of the gifts, I'll say in air quotes, that the pandemic gave us, and God bless anyone who's been affected, in the loss of a family member. So I'm not suggesting that it was a godsend, because it wasn't.
Right.
But one of the things that it gave us in this family is the grace to know that things are going to be imperfect, and that'll be okay, and life will go on, and that means we might miss something, and that means that maybe we're not on time, or it means that maybe the regularly scheduled thing that must happen every Saturday at 5 p.m. doesn't happen this Saturday at 5 p.m. because something else called us away. Or, maybe, one of the things that has happened, and any parents of teenagers out there will, I think, acknowledge this. My kids went into the pandemic as a preteen and a budding teenager, and they are exiting the pandemic as proto-adults.
Hmm.
So my kids have opinions. They've always had opinions, but now they really have opinions,
Okay.
and they really know how to lend their voice to their opinions.
Mm-hmm.
And there's the school of thought that says, well, look, I'm the parent, you're the kid. The way this is going to work is, one way. And I think one of the other things that we're going to probably continue to evolve toward is, it's still pretty much going to work my way, but I do want to hear that opinion. Maybe we change a little bit. Maybe we adapt a little bit to what you're saying, because to completely discount that point of view doesn't feel right either.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so that's another thing. So I think the first thing is give ourselves a little grace on expectation setting,
Mm-hmm.
as parents, sort of type A, parents. The second, I think, is recognizing that, look, I've got, and again, you've gone through this. I've got another, what is it my wife likes to say? I've got another 3 summers
Yeah.
with my oldest.
Mm-hmm.
And then that child will be on their way. When you think about it in those terms, it gives you a little bit of pause about how much time do you want to spend arguing about something that's really more about control than it is about what's good and right and fair. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know. So anyway, and maybe I'm just coming to that conclusion. I still got to get my wife there, but that's kind of the 2 things that I think I'm going to leave the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean that's powerful. Like I didn't know if you were going to say something like we're going to keep movie night or we're going to keep whatever. But what you said, though, I mean, in terms of really giving your kids a voice, that's just infinitely more powerful.
Yeah.
And very often, I mean, I'm sure you've noticed this as well, that even if they don't agree with, I mean, like even if the outcome is not going to be the way they want it to be, they've spoken, they've been heard. And, they'll take that with them.
Yeah.
That their voice has value when they're in school, in college, or even still at high school, or just any community that affects them. They'll realize that they have a voice. They deserve to be heard. They will have practice doing so respectfully,
Mm-hmm.
and
That's right.
making their case in a respectful way, and that's valuable. So I'm so glad. Yeah,
No,
that's something to
that's
keep.
that's absolutely, like, I want, if I get to have a want and what the kids will be in the future, I want them to be able to go off and advocate for themselves, and
Mm-hmm.
and say what's on their minds, not
Mm-hmm.
in a way that it's sort of, if it doesn't go that way then the world comes to an end, but definitely without a fear that, by them expressing their feelings, they lose out. And I think that stuff starts at home,
Mm-hmm.
and I
Mm-hmm.
think, I you know I think, at this stage of the game, like, I joke with them all the time. I say, well, you're 15 years old. I'm 3 times older than you. So I've been here longer, right? So just by virtue of that, I might know a little bit more than you know about a topic or two. But they've been here for 15 years. They've, the hard knocks of, middle school and early high school, like there are actually lessons there. And there's some rough edges there. And they know those things and they bring those things home. And I think it would be a disservice if you don't acknowledge their experience too, even though they still have a million things that they'll learn in the next 3 years. You got to start acknowledging them as soon as you can, I think. So anyway, those are a couple of things I'm going to take away from this pandemic. I don't know that we kept any routine, so I'd love to tell you we kept a routine. We did not keep a routine. It was hard enough just to make sure everybody sort of got to where they needed to be, was fed. So anyway.
So from a professional standpoint, and it's not your particular company, but just your position in that arena, what do you think that companies and organizations are going to do going forward? Because that was something else that, I predicted. I just should have been more vocal or something like that. I don't know. But, I also said that, all of these companies that for years said, oh, no, we don't support teleworking, without saying it, they just didn't trust their employees.
Yeah.
But come to find out that everybody I know that worked for another organization, they were very serious about getting their work done on the schedule and all of that stuff. And I think a lot of companies really found that a lot of companies were pleasantly surprised that, they were highly productive. Yeah. Working at home, considering all the conditions that they had to deal with, particularly if they had children. So what do you think is going to happen?
Yeah. What seems clear, the data suggests that productivity increased, individual productivity increased through the pandemic. Mm-hmm. So the question about whether or not an individual can be productive in this environment, using the tools and resources that we have today, by and large, to work in a service-related industry, that question's been answered. Mm-hmm. That's a different question, though, than what are companies or businesses going to do. If I had a crystal ball, I would tell you that companies are, and you're starting to see it already. There's a lot of tension about this in the workplace at the moment. Companies are going to want their employees to come back to the office, and there's some really good reasons why, beyond just a lack of trust. To use your words, there's this thing that people talk about. And I think some people, sort of go, it's not really that important. But boy, it's important when you feel it. And that is culture.
Okay. Yeah.
It's nothing you can necessarily put your hands on. But when you get a large group of people together and you have a mission to do something, it might be creating a profit, it might be helping people, who knows what it is. But when you do that, that stuff that's in between is the culture of the place. And you can have a culture that is a value add to that work or that activity, and it can make the company go. And people can't even describe what makes this company go, but it's that culture. Or you can have a culture that's destructive. And I would tell you, in my own experience, that the stuff that we can't gain, you and I know one another, right? So we have a rapport here that's built on more than just me showing up on the screen and you showing up on the screen and us talking. The stuff that you can't replicate through virtually and through distance turns out in my mind to be really important. How do you develop, right? How do you learn? Not learn, the academic stuff, but learn the style, learn the approach, learn the nuance, learn the emotional triggers that would enable you to make decisions that are going to further your cause. How do you advance, right, in a career? How does one achieve sponsorship in a career? Those are the things that you can't do. I'm just not convinced you can do them in this environment. So I think companies recognizing that, even though that maybe they're not the best at the moment on articulating what the why, they know innately that we can't necessarily do it all this way. Now, that's not to say that there won't be certain jobs, right? Certain types of jobs that I think can be easily done this way, right? But the trade-off is that you're going to be a cog, right, in the machinery, right? Replaceable, right? May be specialized, but it doesn't matter whether it's Richard or Joe if I'm not there and I'm not present. And so I think there will be some flexibility. There was before, but I think there will be even more flexibility, and there will be more of the labor force that pushes the notion of, look, I don't need to be any particular place to get my job done. I can be wherever's comfortable for me in my situation, whatever that happens to be. And for certain jobs, I think companies will lean into that. Now, here's the other thing. I also think that we are living in a moment from an economic standpoint where, coming out of the pandemic, as devastating as it was to our economy, it widened the gap between haves and have-nots. If you were a have, right, during this downturn that as a function of the pandemic, didn't really harm you all that much, right? You kind of went to work every day from your home office, and your company gave you a computer and made the provision to have you connect to whatever you needed to connect to. You did your job, and life kind of went on, and you probably saved some money, right? So you're feeling actually pretty good right now, all things being equal. If you were a have-not, in many cases, you might have had to still go and show up physically to work. Or maybe you get laid off, right? And the government made some provision for that too, in many cases. So I think, though, that right now we enjoy an economy that looks like it's got a pretty an upturn ahead of it. But there could be other ways too it could go. and so I think the reason I went down that road is, I think you read all these headlines about people who say, well, I'm just, if they make me go back to the office, then I'm not going to go. I'm going to go get a job somewhere else. And that's okay, as long as there's a job somewhere else. Right. But if the economy, gets a kick, then, then I think people will have to reevaluate those decisions. And so I think it'll be a slow, gradual return. It may not ever get back to 2019, but it'll be 2019 adjacent.
Right. And, you brought up very important points about the culture, the collegiality of being in the same physical space, working together. I'm just, what I was wondering, and you did hit on it, is just the increased flexibility. Like, yes, because I think a lot of employees, will understand that they have to go back. Now, I mean, I don't understand anybody saying, that had a job where they 100% had to be at a place, and then the employer tells them they have to come back, and they're not coming back at all. Yeah. That's like nuts. But to me, but if the employer's kind of like, maybe it's a company, an organization that didn't try teleworking at all, or that whole flex time, the way they used to do in the government, where you work so many hours so that you can have every other Friday off, or something like that. I'm hoping that there's more of that. Or if you have an employee that just has a strong track record, they, during the pandemic, they continued at that rate, but something's, a child is sick or whatever. Yeah. Or they would be now more willing to trust that that employee would go work at home, tend to that child, or elderly parent, what have you, and still get the work done, and just allow that flexibility.
No, I think by and large you'll see that flexibility. I think many companies were leaning that way anyway, for what I would say professional staff. If you were in a situation where you were an essential worker, or where you had to go in no matter what, I actually think those types of roles might even have a little less flexibility. I would hope not, but I mean, they might have a little less flexibility because right now, the labor market is so tight. There is not one business owner that I know of that is not currently looking for someone to hire. And there are incentives being laid against jobs where you never really saw incentives before. So I think it's a short-term issue, but I think it's going to be hard for someone who's in one of those essential roles to have the flexibility, because there's not two people, right? It's just you, and you're going to have to cover, I need you to cover, this shift and half of the next shift kind of thing. And I think that they will feel the brunt. But no, by and large, I think the flexibility, people get it. I think some of the grace that we were giving each other when kids and pets and everything, the world around you showed up in your meeting, because that's what I think people will remember that for some time. And I think some of that grace will continue even as we go back into the office.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I think you shared a lot of valuable insights. That's what folks have been saying. Let me just make sure there aren't any questions or anything. Nope, nothing right now. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and just being transparent about your own experience, balancing and trying to I don't like to use the balance. I like work-life harmony instead. But and also, a bit about your experiences dealing with the pandemic. And I also think it's useful for people to hear your thoughts about, what you think might be going on in corporate America, or, as employers think about how we're going to move forward after this pandemic.
Carol, I'm glad to do it. It's been great always chatting with you. You talk about work-life balance. I will say one thing, because it's, you said work-life harmony. I like that term. I know there are a lot of folks out there who said there is no work-life balance. I don't know whether there is or there isn't. But what I do know is that if, as a parent, maybe as a spouse too, but there certainly as a parent, you just need to make sure you factor both in.
Right.
You just need to make sure that, again, early in my career, I thought I'd sort of had all this factored down. Turns out I didn't. But you just need to factor in the personal and the professional, because it's like you can't unmix that Kool-Aid, right? That is your life. It's personal and it's professional. To your point, technology makes the distance, not even a question. And if you haven't factored it into your plan, and you haven't factored it into the way you think about either one of those things, then you're just going to end up beating your head up against a wall. And the people around you are going to, feel it, and they're going to beat their head up against the wall too. So just factor it all in.
That's
I
right.
don't know if it's balanced, or sometimes maybe it's balanced, sometimes it's not, but it's all there.
Right, right, exactly. So thank you again. And thank you everybody who tuned in. And by all means, if you didn't catch all of it, you came in midway. You can certainly access the replay. Again, I hope that you'll join me as well as other colleagues who will be participating in the You Are Enough conference. You can register at youareenoughconference.com. And have a good evening, everybody.